What if the person you trusted most in this world, the one who shared your home, your heart, your very life, suddenly crossed a line you thought had been buried forever? What if the past you believed you had healed from suddenly came rushing back, more raw and painful than you could imagine? That gut-wrenching feeling, that impossible mix of disbelief, anger, and heartbreak hit me like a freight train just last week. Hi everyone, I'm Ananya. I'm 35, a mother of 2 beautiful children, and for the last 15 years I've been married to my husband. We've had our moments of happiness, our quiet nights together, and the ordinary beauty of family life. But I also know betrayal in a way that no one ever wants to. Twice, deeply, and painfully. Today, I'm sharing a story that shook me to my core, and I promise it's raw, real, and something many of you may relate to in ways that are uncomfortable but necessary to confront. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you won't miss this story or any others we share here. The first time he cheated, I was only a few years into our relationship. I remember the moment like it was yesterday, the creeping suspicion, the gut feeling that something wasn't right, the quiet nights of agonizing over texts, missed calls, and unexplained absences. I wanted to run, to hide, to escape the pain, but I also loved him. So we tried. We sought counseling, individual, together, and slowly, painstakingly, rebuilt trust brick by brick. Then, just a few years later, shortly after our second child was born, it happened again. Another man, another betrayal. And though it broke me in ways I hadn't imagined possible, we survived. We separated briefly, a month or 2, before coming back together, attempting to heal the wounds that seemed permanent. For years, we worked through therapy, through tears, through the kind of conversations that leave your chest aching and your mind restless at night. For the past 2 or 3 years, I truly believed we were past it. We were happy in a way I hadn't dared to hope for before. I trusted him with everything. I even shared things about my own childhood trauma, memories I had sworn I'd never tell a soul, secrets that left me feeling exposed even in the safest spaces. I trusted him with my heart, my vulnerability, my life, and for a while it felt like we were finally safe, like the storm had passed. But last week, everything changed. It started innocently enough, or at least it seemed that way. My husband was talking to someone we knew through our children's youth sports. At first, it appeared harmless. I barely noticed because I wanted to trust again. I really did. But then I started seeing little things. A phone turned away when I walked past. Messages deleted almost instantly. Nervous laughter that didn't reach his eyes. A feeling deep in my chest that something was wrong, that history was creeping back in without permission. I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to hope this was just my mind playing tricks after all we had endured, but my intuition, that relentless inner voice that refuses to be silenced, kept screaming, "Pay attention. Watch closer. Something's not right," and so I did what I had feared. I checked his phone, and what I found made my blood run cold. Messages, suggestive, flirty, inappropriate. A pattern repeating itself so eerily that it felt like a nightmare I had escaped had come back to haunt me. My chest tightened. My hands shook. Anger, disbelief, heartbreak. They all collided inside me, leaving me unable to think clearly. When I confronted him the next morning, he didn't deny anything. In fact, he admitted it casually, brushing it off as harmless flirtation, as if words that crossed boundaries were meaningless. But to me, they were everything. They were a betrayal not just of trust, but of everything I had worked to rebuild, everything we had painstakingly tried to heal. I told him clearly, if nothing was ever going to come of it, then why entertain it at all? The lack of respect, the audacity was staggering. He insisted I was overreacting, that I was blowing it out of proportion, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I couldn't process how easily he could disregard everything, the depth of pain he caused, the trust shattered in a matter of moments. The morning blurred into a haze of tears, trembling hands, and a heart screaming that the past had returned. Thankfully, I wasn't entirely alone. My in-laws, the people who had welcomed me as their own, stood firmly by my side. Their fury mirrored my own, their support a lifeline in the chaos. But then there was my mother. She had known about past betrayals, and she had kept silent. Her reasoning, that she didn't want my daughter to grow up without a father, did little to soften the sting of betrayal. It cut just as sharply as my husband's actions. By now, the story had taken on a life of its own in my mind, a storm I couldn't contain. The tension, the fear, the disbelief, they all fused into one unrelenting force. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, it did. This morning, he had the audacity to show up at my in-laws' home. With the woman. Not the person I had feared, not my best friend, but another woman entirely, whose presence made my heart race in disbelief. My father-in-law, furious and protective, acted instantly, removing both of them from our home. In that moment, I realized something profound. My true family, the people who loved me unconditionally, were here to shield me and my children from the storm. As I sit here, reflecting on the past 15 years, on the betrayals, the pain, the heartbreak, and the moments of fragile hope, I know one thing with certainty. I will not let this define me. I deserve better. My daughter deserves better. And while the scars of betrayal linger, they will not dictate the life I build moving forward. If you've ever felt the crushing weight of betrayal, if you've ever been in the eye of a storm that seemed impossible to survive, know this. You are not alone. Hit that subscribe button and join our community, where real stories of struggle, heartbreak, and survival are shared, where voices are heard and strength is found. Together, we will navigate these storms, one story at a time. The moment I caught the messages, my mind raced faster than I could process. I kept replaying every interaction from the past week, every deleted message, every glance, every excuse he had given. How could I have been so blind, so trusting again? I questioned myself constantly. Was I imagining things? Was I overreacting? But the texts, spoke for themselves. They were unmistakable, inappropriate, and completely crossed boundaries. I remember sitting on the edge of our bed, hands trembling, staring at the phone in disbelief. The betrayal from years ago had returned, not as a ghost, but as a living, breathing reality. The sheer repetition of his behavior was suffocating. I had survived the first 2 betrayals, and I had vowed never to be blindsided again. Yet here I was, facing the same pattern. I confronted him that morning, my voice shaking, my heart pounding as I demanded the truth. For a fleeting moment, I expected him to crumble, to fall to his knees and beg for forgiveness, but he didn't. He admitted to the inappropriate messages as if they were nothing, just a harmless mistake, a simple flirtation. I couldn't comprehend it. How could someone who had caused so much pain, who had already broken trust twice, treat it like nothing? How could he look me in the eye and minimize the damage done to me, to our marriage, to our family? The conversation escalated quickly. I wasn't just angry. I was hurt, terrified, and exhausted from reliving trauma I thought we had overcome. If nothing would ever come of it, I asked, my voice cracking, then why even entertain it? Why disregard the respect, the trust, the foundation of everything we've built? He told me I was overreacting, that I was reading too much into it, that I was blowing it out of proportion. And in that moment, I realized something. I had to protect myself. I had to protect my children. I had to recognize that this wasn't just about the messages. It was about a lack of accountability, a repeated pattern of betrayal, and my refusal to accept being treated with anything less than respect. I couldn't allow history to repeat itself again without consequences. My in-laws, thankfully, were unwavering. As soon as I confided in them, they stood beside me like a wall of protection. They listened without judgment, offered advice grounded in love, and reassured me that my feelings were valid. They understood the gravity of the situation and made it clear they were here for me and my children. That support was a lifeline, a reminder that even in the depths of betrayal, I was not alone. But then there was my mother. She had known all along about the past, about the previous affairs, about the pain I had endured, and she stayed silent. She told me later that she didn't want my daughter to grow up without a father. I could understand the intention, but the impact, the sting of knowing someone you trust withheld the truth, was profound. Her silence felt like a betrayal, too. A confirmation that even those closest to you can fail you in ways that cut deeper than strangers ever could. As the hours passed, I realized I had a decision to make. Do I confront him further? Do I distance myself temporarily to process the shock? Do I start taking steps to protect my family legally, emotionally, and financially? The whirlwind of emotions was overwhelming. Anger, fear, heartbreak, and determination collided inside me. I needed space, not as a punishment but as a shield, a way to regain clarity in the midst of chaos. Later that morning, he had the audacity to show up at my in-laws' house with the woman. I froze as I watched him walk through the door, as if nothing had happened. My blood boiled. The nerve, the complete lack of awareness of the storm he had caused. The woman wasn't who I had feared, but the shock and humiliation of that moment was undeniable. My father-in-law didn't hesitate. His voice was firm, angry, protective. Both of them were asked to leave immediately. That moment was both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because the confrontation forced me to face the reality of the situation head-on. Liberating because it reaffirmed the unwavering support I had in my in-laws, who truly treated me like their own daughter. I sat there, trembling, processing the intensity of what had just happened. I realized that this wasn't just about betrayal. It was about boundaries, about respect, and about reclaiming control of my life and my family's well-being. For too long, I had allowed the past to define me, to dictate how I felt and reacted. But this time, I would not be a passive participant in the drama. I would act deliberately, thoughtfully, and firmly. I also knew I needed legal protection, guidance on how to navigate the next steps with my husband. Counseling had helped in the past, but this time, action was necessary. Boundaries needed to be set, rules established, safety ensured, and above all, I needed to regain my own peace of mind. As I reflect on this, I realize something crucial. Surviving betrayal is not just about forgiveness or reconciliation. It's about understanding your worth, setting boundaries, and refusing to allow repeated patterns to continue unchallenged. I am not crazy for feeling hurt. I am not overreacting for demanding respect. I am not weak for seeking space and clarity. And so I start this journey, slowly, deliberately, reclaiming my life, my heart, and my sense of security. I may feel fragile, but I am determined. I may feel betrayed, but I am not defeated. And I am learning once again that strength isn't about suppressing your pain. It's about facing it, confronting it, and emerging stronger than before. If you've ever experienced betrayal, the kind that shakes you to your core and tests your trust in the world, know that you are not alone. Hit that subscribe button and join our community. Here, we share stories that resonate, that challenge, and that heal. We face storms together, one story at a time. The day after that confrontation felt surreal. I woke up to silence. A heavy, almost oppressive quiet in the house. It wasn't the peace of calm, but the stillness of tension, of lives paused. I sat on the edge of my bed, coffee in hand, staring blankly at the wall. The betrayal, the audacity, the repeated pattern of disregard, it all weighed on me like a stone pressing against my chest. I knew I needed to make decisions, but the first step was acknowledging my feelings without shame. Anger, hurt, confusion, fear, they were all valid. I allowed myself to sit in them for a moment, to recognize that my reaction was a reflection of love, of care, of the standards I set for myself and my family. I had been through so much already, and this was not a sign of weakness. It was a sign that I valued myself enough to demand respect. I spent hours reviewing everything, retracing conversations, noting patterns. I realized how carefully I had navigated our past betrayals, how much trust I had painstakingly rebuilt, and how fragile it all still was. But knowledge is power, and I was determined not to let myself be blindsided again. I started documenting everything, the messages, the dates, the patterns of secrecy. This wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity, about protection, about ensuring that if this escalated legally, I had a clear record of events. My in-laws were a sanctuary. They understood the gravity of the situation and provided a safe space for me to breathe, to reflect, and to process. I leaned on them for guidance, not because I was incapable, but because I knew that facing something so emotionally draining alone would be like fighting a storm without shelter. Their support reminded me that family isn't always defined by blood alone. It's defined by loyalty, by care, and by standing firm when someone else would falter. At the same time, I began to reevaluate my boundaries. I needed space, not just physically but emotionally. I had spent years accommodating, forgiving, rebuilding, and nurturing trust. Now it was time to prioritize my mental and emotional well-being. I made a plan. No contact beyond necessary communication, clearly defined expectations for co-parenting, and access to legal counsel to protect myself and my children. It was empowering to take control, even in small steps. I also realized the importance of self-care in the midst of chaos. I allowed myself moments of stillness, quiet walks, journaling, and simply sitting with my thoughts without judgment. I reconnected with hobbies I had set aside, small rituals that reminded me I was more than this betrayal, more than this pain. It wasn't about escaping reality. It was about grounding myself so I could face it with clarity and resilience. Then came the difficult conversations. Friends, family, and even therapy sessions where I had to articulate what had happened and how it made me feel. It was exhausting, emotionally draining, and at times terrifying. But each conversation reinforced one truth. My feelings were valid, my responses justified, and my worth was undeniable. I wasn't overreacting. I was responding to repeated patterns of disrespect that no one should have to tolerate. I also had to confront the complicated emotions about my mother. Her silence had hurt as deeply as my husband's actions. I realized that forgiveness, if it were to come, would need to be tempered with understanding. She had her reasons, but those reasons didn't erase the hurt, the sense of betrayal. I allowed myself to feel the pain fully, to articulate it without fear of judgment, and to define what support I needed moving forward. Days turned into a week, and I began to notice subtle shifts. The initial shock began to fade into a steady resolve. I no longer felt paralyzed by disbelief or anger. I felt focused. My priorities were clear: protect my children, protect myself, and reclaim my life from the shadow of repeated betrayals. In counseling, we worked through strategies for handling co-parenting, communication boundaries, and rebuilding trust in myself first. It wasn't about trusting him again. It was about trusting my own judgment, trusting my instincts, and recognizing my own strength. I realized that resilience isn't about ignoring pain. It's about learning from it and refusing to be defined or limited by it. I also took steps to strengthen my support network, friends who had always been there, colleagues who offered understanding, and even online communities where real people shared real experiences became lifelines. I realized the power of connection, of having people who validate your experience and provide perspective without judgment. It reminded me I was not alone, and that the storm, however intense, could be weathered with the right support. By the second week, I was starting to reclaim normalcy, not as it was before, but in a way that was intentional and controlled. I was learning to say no, to assert my needs, and to set limits without guilt. I realized that boundaries were not walls to isolate me. They were shields to protect the life I was building, the peace I was cultivating, and the example I wanted to set for my children about self-respect and dignity. And through it all, I kept returning to a single truth. My worth is not defined by the actions of someone who repeatedly failed to honor it. My happiness, my peace, and my family's well-being are my responsibility. I had survived betrayal before, and I would survive it again. But this time with clarity, support, and unshakable resolve. If you've ever felt betrayed, if someone you trusted has crossed a line you thought was untouchable, know this: you are not alone. Your feelings are valid. Your boundaries matter, and there is strength in taking space, reclaiming control, and prioritizing your well-being. If this story resonates with you, if you want to hear more real-life accounts of betrayal, resilience, and personal empowerment, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Here, we share stories that stir emotions, challenge perspectives, and remind us all that surviving the storm is possible. One story at a time, together. The next stage of this journey was about action. Reflection and processing were important. But now I had to protect my life, my children, and my future. I began consulting with a family lawyer, someone recommended by a close friend who had navigated a similar storm. We discussed custody arrangements, legal protections, and financial safeguards. I wanted to ensure that, regardless of what my husband did, my children and I would have security and stability. We drafted a clear agreement. He would have limited access, only supervised contact if necessary, and a defined financial contribution for the children's needs. I wanted to remove ambiguity, to set rules that he couldn't ignore or manipulate. My lawyer emphasized the importance of documentation. Every text, every conversation, every moment that hinted at misconduct or emotional neglect. I took this seriously, turning my meticulous note-taking and observations into a structured record. Meanwhile, I also had to navigate my own emotional boundaries. The thought of seeing him, speaking to him, or even hearing about him was exhausting. I decided to limit all interactions to text messages or through our lawyer, to minimize emotional triggers. I refused to be drawn into arguments, to rationalize his behavior, or to justify myself. My energy was too precious, my heart too fragile, and my children too important to waste on needless conflict. As I implemented these measures, I noticed a shift in myself. I felt lighter, not because the pain was gone, but because I had reclaimed control. Each decision I made reinforced my autonomy. Each boundary I enforced was a declaration that my family's well-being was non-negotiable. It was empowering in ways I hadn't anticipated. At home, I focused on rebuilding routines with my children. Simple things, story time, bedtime rituals, cooking together, became anchors in a sea of uncertainty. I realized that normalcy, even small slices of it, could be a source of stability and comfort for both me and my kids. I wanted them to feel safe, to see me strong, and to learn that respect, honesty, and self-worth are non-negotiable. I also worked on healing my relationship with myself. Therapy became a sanctuary, a place to process layers of betrayal, childhood trauma, and the stress of repeated emotional violations. I practiced mindfulness, journaling, and self-compassion. Every step, every small victory, whether it was saying no without guilt or holding my boundaries firmly, was a reminder that I could navigate the aftermath of betrayal without losing myself. The most unexpected support came from my in-laws. Their unwavering loyalty and protection were a lifeline. They helped with childcare, gave me space to breathe, and treated me with the respect I deserved. They had become more than extended family. They were my foundation, my shield, and a reminder that not everyone would fail or betray me. Their presence gave me confidence that I could stand tall, even in the most difficult moments. There were still challenges, of course. Each time my husband tried to overstep, each reminder of his past actions, each emotional tug, it required strength to maintain distance. But every time I did, I felt my resolve grow stronger. I was no longer reacting impulsively. I was responding intentionally, protecting my children, my heart, and my peace. I realized that healing is not linear. Some days are easier than others. Some moments bring tears or anger, but what mattered was the trajectory. I was moving forward, building a life rooted in trust, self-respect, and resilience. I learned to celebrate progress, no matter how small, and to recognize that my worth was not tied to his actions or his failures. The final piece was reclaiming my narrative. I decided to share my story, not to expose him, not to shame, but to shed light on the reality of betrayal and recovery. By speaking my truth, I could transform pain into empowerment, isolation into community, and despair into hope. It was a declaration. My past does not define me. My mistakes are acknowledged and learned from, and my future is mine to shape. If you've experienced betrayal, manipulation, or repeated emotional pain, know that you are not alone. Your feelings are valid, your boundaries matter, and your resilience is real. Healing is possible, even when the hurt feels unbearable, even when trust seems impossible to rebuild. If this story resonates with you, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. On this channel, we explore real-life experiences, the raw and unfiltered moments of life that challenge us, break us, and ultimately help us grow. Here you'll find stories that remind you are stronger than you think. And even after the storm, a new dawn awaits. As I sit here reflecting on everything, I realize how much this journey has taught me, not just about betrayal, but about strength, self-worth, and the power of boundaries. I've learned that love is not about sacrificing yourself or tolerating repeated violations. It's about respect, honesty, and trust. And when those are broken, it's not weakness to step back. It's courage. I've also learned that healing isn't just about moving past someone else's actions. It's about reclaiming your life, your time, and your energy. Every decision I make now is intentional. Every boundary I set is a declaration. And every moment I spend nurturing my children and myself is an act of love. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm living my life on my own terms. And it's liberating. Even though the betrayal cut deeply, I refuse to let it define my narrative. I'm more than the pain I've endured. I am the strength that rose from it. I am a mother, a protector, a woman who refuses to be silenced or diminished. And while I grieve what could have been, I celebrate what is. A life that I control, a family that supports me, and a heart that will not be compromised again. There are moments of doubt, of course. Some nights I lie awake thinking of the past, wondering if I could have done things differently. But I remind myself that no amount of self-recrimination changes what happened. The only thing I can control is what comes next, the choices I make, the boundaries I enforce, and the example I set for my children. Sharing my story here, on this platform, is part of that process. It's a way to release the weight of secrecy, to connect with those who may have faced similar betrayals, and to offer a sense of solidarity. If you've ever felt the sting of infidelity, the erosion of trust, or the shock of discovering a loved one's hidden actions, know this: your feelings are valid, your hurt is real, and your path to healing matters. Through all of this, I've learned that support is everything. My in-laws stood beside me unwaveringly. My friends provided perspective and encouragement, and professional guidance helped me navigate the legal and emotional complexities. It reminded me that you don't have to endure life's storms alone. You deserve allies, advocates, and people who honor your pain without judgment. Looking forward, my focus is on building a life that is whole, safe, and nurturing. I'm determined to instill in my children the values I hold dear: respect, honesty, and resilience. I want them to see that setbacks, betrayals, and heartbreaks do not have to define us. They can be lessons that shape us into stronger, more compassionate individuals. As I close this chapter, I feel a sense of peace I didn't think was possible a few weeks ago. The journey hasn't been easy, and it won't be finished overnight. But every step I take, every choice I make, brings me closer to a life defined by integrity, love, and self-respect. If you've been moved by this story, if you've faced your own trials, or if you want to hear more real-life experiences of courage, betrayal, and resilience, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Here we explore the raw and unfiltered truths of life, the moments that test us, the choices that define us, and the stories that remind us we're never alone. Thank you for listening, for caring, and for being part of this community. Remember, even after the deepest betrayals, even in the darkest nights, a new day is waiting. And with it comes hope, healing, and the chance to reclaim your life, stronger, wiser, and unbroken.